Thank you for attending the best practices for automating the cloud security process. My name is Phil Rodriguez. I'm a security solutions architect at Amazon Web Services based in Sydney, Australia, and I'll be the host and moderator for today's webinar. I'm joined by Craig Dent of Evident.io and Eddie Barrero at Robert Half International, who will be speaking. I'd like to spend the next few minutes covering AWS cloud security. So your data is important. As more and more businesses become data-centric, it becomes increasingly important to protect your data in order to protect your business. The loss or exposure of your data can be very damaging, either reputationally or with direct financial harm. In addition to this, legal jurisdictions around the world either have or are starting to enact data exposure laws. For example, here in Australia, we have the Breach Notification Act coming to effect in February. AWS is in a position to help. At AWS, we understand that our environment can be more secure than your existing or on-premises environment. We look at security in a bunch of different ways, both in our release of new security services and features over the last few years, especially. This report happens to be from 2015. And in the many additional security features that we create in the existing services that we have. I think in security, it's always important to start with the basics. For example, here are some real focus areas around logging and monitoring that I'll go into in a moment, especially the ease and ubiquitousness of encryption and authentication, which along with identity management is a key enabler to be able to use the cloud securely. At AWS, our most important security concept we call the shared responsibility model. This is the basis for all of our contracts with customers. This is fundamental to how we actually design our services, and it's essential for customers to understand as you consume these services. Very simply put, AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, which is securing the core global infrastructure that is the basis for the services we offer to the public. Our customers are responsible for security in the cloud, which is making good decisions around the various security configurations that are available in our services. Two very simple examples. For our global infrastructure, the physical infrastructure there, that's obviously our responsibility to both keep secure and keep available. While, for example, the operating system that you choose to install inside of our compute platform or EC2 is your choice, as are the security choices you make along with that. So one important principle of security is always monitoring. And the AWS environment is very consistently and constantly monitored. And again, if we look at below the line and above the line, AWS itself, we monitor our core global infrastructure, including network infrastructure, to be looking for various things, maybe signs of external attack, or for signs of suspicious activity that might lead us to discover that somebody's doing something abusive or outside of our terms of service. Above the line, we offer a number of different monitoring services for customers to consume and use as building blocks in their own services. For example, CloudTrail is our global logging platform that specifically looks at and records all API calls throughout the infrastructure. CloudWatch is our operational monitoring solution, which can look at performance of the various components that you're consuming. And Amazon Inspector is our automatic vulnerability detection tool, useful for both Windows and Linux environments, and is another tool in our customers' toolbox for how to monitor their cloud environments. I said before that one of our key benefits to customers was really immediate access to our global infrastructure. And the most important thing that we can do to this infrastructure, in addition to keeping it secure, is to keep it available for everybody. So we have 44 of what we call availability zones around the world. Availability zones are clusters of multiple physical locations, and they're contained within regions. Regions only ever exist in one country, and we have 16 of these regions around the world. For example, in Asia Pacific, a number of different regions, including Australia, including Japan, including Singapore, including China, and including South Korea. It's very important that no matter how large our global footprint is, the customer always maintains control of where they want their data to be stored and maintains ownership of that data the entire time. And when you choose to put your data into one availability zone or one region, that data will not leave that region unless you choose to move it. We also protect this infrastructure to keep it available. I think a really good example is against availability attacks, such as denial of service attacks, where we have a number of different services in what we call our edge network, both around CloudFront, which is our content delivery network, around Route 53, which is our DNS hosting service, and around AWS Shield, which is our DDoS mitigation service. The important part about the cloud is that it works in concert with your own existing security services that you're used to today. And this integration is fundamentally important for a few different ways. I mentioned how important identity and access management is in the cloud. And an essential component of that is federation, which is integrating with your existing directory store, for example, Active Directory, to make sure that you are maintaining the authoritative source of information, of identification, and of authentication for your users, and simply federating that information into the cloud so that you're maintaining that source of control yourselves. The network access is another important integration point. We offer dedicated connections called Direct Connect, which provides secure private connectivity, so you don't necessarily have to use the public internet in order for access into AWS. And finally, our encryption services allow you to, for example, our key management service, or KMS, allows you to both use our service to create that encryption key, or to what we call bring your own key, or import a key you've created elsewhere in whatever manner is fit for your environment, and import that into our environment. So the way that we demonstrate our global security program, especially all of the rich security controls that exist below the line, is through our global assurance program. It's a very important focus for us, and we've been focusing on this since the first day AWS started business. And we are proud to maintain compliance with a number of different community, technology, industry, and government standards around the world. Two specific ones that come up quite often. The first is ISO 27001, which is a listing of the security controls that we as a business maintain to protect, for example, our business, our staff, and our data. And that's how we attest to customers on how we're keeping ourselves secure. The SOC program, especially SOC 2, is slightly different. That's a very detailed listing of the security controls that we have in our services ourselves, and is proof to our customers on how we're keeping those services themselves secure. And all of our customers are able to access these audit reports directly by using our AWS Artifact service, which is available to anyone with an AWS account and allows you direct access into these compliance programs. I'd like to turn it over now to Craig Dent, who's a Cloud Security Solutions Architect at Evident.io, who's going to go into much more detail on Evident.io's offerings. Go ahead, Craig.
Thanks, Phil. Welcome, everyone. My name's Craig Dent. I just want to build on what Phil's been talking about and also showcase what we can do and how we can help you. But first, I just want to take a step back. Yeah, so back to the shared responsibility model. I know we've all seen this slide before. It's familiar to all of us. The stuff above that thin little black line that splits the two halves is what you as the customer are traditionally responsible for. And AWS help us with that by providing us with some tools to do so. And the thin little black line is also the API control plane, and that's where the majority of the attacks occur. Many of those events and breaches have recently been highlighted in the news, unfortunately. And unfortunately, in most cases, customers have either manually or programmatically misconfigured the AWS services security settings. It's important to remember that every service that gets spun up in your instance, no matter whether it lasts for 30 minutes, 30 days, or longer, you have to be sure that you've set all the security dials for it to match the requirements in your organization's security policy. And if it's a regulated workload, you need to be sure that the settings will pass inspection, whether that be for PCI or SOC 2 or ISO 27001. When the auditors come around, you have to be able to demonstrate that you manage your security day in and day out. And it's a lot to manage without automation, and just hoping and trusting that everything's okay is not really a very good strategy. So now that we understand our responsibilities, there's a few ways we could approach it. In approach one, the security team reviews everything. The workflow requires that developers and administrators have to send all their code and all their changes to the security team for approval. But that creates a huge backlog, and it slows down your development team, and it severely impacts your ability to get things delivered. So approach two then is to just open the floodgates and hope for the best. In this approach, the security team spot checks after the deployment, and this provides the greatest agility and the greatest release speed. But the problem here is that vulnerabilities will exist before you can find them, and it leaves holes open for attacks. The other problem is that the SecOps team only see a sample, and they lose complete visibility, and often they don't even have full access. So the third, and what we believe the best approach, is to use a shared security responsibility model and an emerging mindset around DevSecOps. DevSecOps is like DevOps in that it seeks to achieve greater efficiency and productivity through team collaboration. But the DevSecOps approach incorporates security principles. And this involves building automated security into the application so it's baked in rather than applied after the fact, or even worse, when you try and retrofit it on later on. These DevSecOps practitioners work alongside the developers at every step of the way. This is unlike traditional security approaches, which can be slow and come along too late in the deployment process. Even Gartner recommend that security and risk management leaders should position an individual as a security expert in development teams, a champion who conveys security priorities and automation to colleagues. So back to that shared responsibility diagram and how to deliver our security obligations. This little black line, the API control plane, is exactly what the attackers are hitting. So that's where Evident can help you. The configuration areas at the top, pointed to by that large blue Evident shield, are some of the areas that the platform can help you out through automation and continuous monitoring to identify vulnerabilities and risks that exist by scanning your API configurations. And that helps you with the boxes below the black line, those 4 boxes that make up the AWS core services, which is compute, storage, database, and networking. Those are the foundational building blocks that everything else is riding on top of. So the Evident security platform was purpose-built to make cloud security easier. Its job is to provide continuous monitoring and alert reporting of infrastructure security and compliance. With Evident, what you get is the ability to continuously identify risk across all of your AWS accounts, all of the regions, and all of the services. And we also tell you how to fix vulnerabilities with step-by-step guided remediation. The platform is good at assessing the configuration posture for your cloud environment and determining which settings pose a risk, and then categorizes those risks as either high, medium, or low. This way you can prioritize your remediation activities with a focus on the most critical risks first. ESP Evident comes with hundreds of predefined security checks that will look for adherence to things like the AWS Foundation benchmarks and security best practices. And importantly, you also have the ability to create your own custom checks. And additionally, with the API integrations and webhooks built in, you can send the risk alert information to the dev or sec teams that need to get the information in the tools where they need it. So the alerts become actionable and they become part of a larger workflow. And importantly, the alerts are also including our recommended steps for remediation. Also with Evident, customers have a SaaS security platform that can automatically and continuously monitor the cloud infrastructure and alert you to any changes that put you out of compliance, or even automatically enforce security policies by further locking down the services that would violate the strict controls of the required compliance frameworks. Further, with the compliance views, such as the PCI view shown here, ESP users have a one-touch compliance reports that indicate pass-fail status for all of the testable infrastructure controls, which clearly saves tremendous time and money in validating compliance, and also gives us the ability to provide evidence to auditors. Here's a list of the compliance views that Evident can currently provide. And on top of this, locally, we are also building modules for things like the ASD-ISM, which is the Australian Signals Directorate Information Security Manual, and also APRA 234 for Financial Services Regulation. On top of that, we've just released a custom compliance module, which will allow our customers to build their own compliance views based on local regulatory controls or even their own internal best practice. An example might be the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, so building a compliance module to give us information about how our standing is against that compliance. And this diagram now is a picture of how the evidence security platform works and what the architecture looks like. So it's a continuous ecosystem where ESP can monitor all of your configuration changes as they're taking place in your AWS environment across all of your services, all of your accounts, and all of your regions. At the bottom, you can see that API control plane again, that cloud control plane. So all we require in order to monitor your environment is a third-party cross-account IAM role that you create in your AWS account in order to grant Evident read-only access to those API calls so that we can make the calls against your resources. And then with the metadata pulled back into our platform, we assess and categorize the risks and threats that are discovered using a risk analysis engine. So not only are we following the AWS and CIS best practices, we're also helping you to enforce them. From that, we then create two types of reports, a security report and a compliance report. So how do you consume those reports? Well, firstly, what you could do is log on to our dashboard and view them there. Or secondly, you can take advantage of the third-party integrations that we have. And that's what we're showing here on the right. And you'll notice that some of these are DevOps tools and some of these are SecOps tools, because we realize that many of the alerts are probably of great interest to both of these teams. The DevOps teams, they just want to come in and fix the problem. But the security team, they want to audit the problem and they want to record the fact that it was fixed. The other way that you can consume the information coming out of our platform is through our RESTful API, which is fully documented and available on the web. And last but not least, the platform can even initiate policy enforcement through SNS and Lambda. And here's an example of what that automated policy enforcement or orchestration might look like. So starting with step 1 on the left, there's a new ESP alert that shows up in the system, and you would normally see it on the dashboard. But for this particular high-risk alert, we've taken advantage of the built-in integrations and a workflow kicks off. And that's what you're seeing in step 2. Simultaneously, notifications are being sent to different systems. So firstly, the alert message is received on an SNS topic, which triggers a Lambda function for auto remediation. So say, for example, the alert detected an EC2 instance sitting behind a security group with a globally accessible port 22 or SSH. Now clearly that's a dangerous risk and something that needs to be fixed. So we can have an automated workflow execute that will close or restrict the port. At the same time, the data about the alert is being sent to the security team via Splunk in this case. And for the DevOps team, a ticket is being opened in ServiceNow that can later be used to track and how long it took to remediate the problem. And also, a message is sent over to the DevOps Slack channel to alert them to the problem. In step 3 then, Lambda is used to fix the problem and remediate the issue, and it's ESP that's kicking off those workflows, but it's not ESP that's actually the system taking action. That's all being done from your own AWS accounts. As soon as the remediation is done, messages are sent over to ServiceNow to close the ticket and get an accurate reporting of the mean time to remediation. And auditors love this. They love seeing that you're managing the risks programmatically as they arise and not just in the last 2 weeks before the audit. Finally, in step 4, ESP runs another scan, and now the configuration is passed and no longer shows up as a risk in your compliance reports, and they come back with more green check marks. So what we're trying to do here is take full advantage of the great capability that AWS gives us, and also rely on the automation of existing integrations to allow you to fix the problem much faster. Now I would like to hand over to Eddie Barrero, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Robert Half International. Eddie is going to talk about how security automation is working in his organization. Take it away, Eddie.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. That was kind. So let me just talk about my company really quickly. I work for Robert Half International. We're a large professional services company. I think we're in 30 plus countries and over 400 offices. Excuse me. A couple other fun facts. Traditionally, we've been a brick and mortar business, meaning a lot of our professional services was serviced out of an office with people meeting people. And so as a company, we're starting to transition from an only brick and mortar business to a business that can meet you wherever you need us to be. So digitization, mobility, those are some big things or themes that we have as an organization. So competing in the cloud. So, for us, once again, as a company, we're rapidly transforming our organization to be more digital, right? We're looking at ways of using technology and innovation to not just grow our business as it is today, but introduce us into new business space. And so as an organization, as a security organization, we've been working hard to keep up with a lot of the innovation that was going on within our company. And you can imagine we're investing in technology, we're really supporting and enabling mobility. And as a security organization, as things grew, we took people and we said, people, please assess the new applications, please assess the new ways we're working, and we just couldn't keep up. And so we really started to focus in on focus in on automation. And I think Craig said it best, right, where there's so much happening so rapidly within our organizations, the only way we can keep up effectively is through automation. And when I think about how attacks and breaches happen today, the longer we have vulnerable systems and our issues baked within our applications, the more opportunities the bad guy has to actually affect our business. So we quickly realized, even with automation, we couldn't do it alone. So one of the big strategies I have and I put in place for our organization is to really start to push security out to where the administration and or the development of an application or system lives. And I think that's really important because, as we know, humans have been at the center point of a lot of breaches and or issues throughout the decades that security has been an issue and been in the news. When I think about a security team, say a team of 40 in a company the size of Robert Half, which is roughly about 17,000 people, it's really difficult for that team to get its arms wrapped around all the security concerns, wrapped around all the controls, wrapped around identifying all the issues. So it's extremely important to partner and build a team that can actually effectively address these issues. So when I think about SecOps, we've really, as a company and as an organization, moved away from hiring the traditional security engineering types of talent. So the guys that know firewalls, that know how to configure tools, that know how to hunt, and really focused in on the what we call Sec DevOps here at Robert Half, but the security guys with the skills that can really look at building out development environments, that know how to program, that live in the DevOps world. And they actually start to partner pretty effectively with folks that are in DevOps, and having some of that skill as a background helps, at least within our organization, build confidence and trust between the teams. And their goal starts to become not to just build good secure systems, but to build automation of controls. Meaning, I think Craig gave a great example of that, right? When something is pushed out to a cloud environment or a VPC within AWS that has a high-risk configuration, for lack of a better term, or is using a really risky, low-security access key to maintain security of their application. Those types of things, from our perspective, shouldn't be allowed. So how do we partner to identify what those things look like and start to build the right level of control through automation to really deal with that type of thing in real time? And to date, it's I think this is an up and coming kind of field and an up and coming strategy, and it's really interesting when you go on to some of the forums and you participate in some of the conferences that actually are exploring how people are doing this. And with the changes that rapidly happen with AWS, the new microservices, the new ways of building systems, this partnership becomes ever more important. And we also partner pretty closely with the risk and compliance folks. And for us, this is really our legal teams. We have new regulations coming out all through Europe, so everyone's familiar with GDPR. In America, a lot of the industries are tightening up how their regulations and managing how we handle data. So being able to actually understand what's coming our way, understand what we need to be compliant against, and being able to run our checks and balances through the risk and compliance teams are really important. And then not last, but I play a particular role where from a 30,000-foot view level, I spend a lot of time looking at how teams are performing, how environments are either trending risk out of their environments and are not dealing with it effectively. And if those things don't get dealt with in a timely manner, so for instance, if we don't have automation to control a particular high-risk situation, I'm looking for people and ownership in other lines of business to deal with those issues. And if I don't see the proper trends, or I don't see the reaction times effectively being, what I think good enough, then we start working with our, CIO, CFO, and CEOs. And in this way, we put the governance and the ownership really back onto the guys that own the business. And it's been a great model to date where all of us kind of working in unison really have driven a lot of risk out of what I think of as our innovation build, right? So we're able to move rapidly, we're able to change from a digital perspective, we're able to enhance our services, we're able to meet kind of client demands pretty quickly and in a very low risk sort of way. Okay. So in the end, I really think, automation, to Craig's point, I'm a big believer in. We are looking to automate as much as we can. We're also exploring how bots can actually play a role in communication and workflow. And so combining that with an ESP solution or ESP events and Evident has just been a really amazing journey. We're getting a lot more done with a lot less. And on the security side, we're able to actually start to dig deeper and really understand our environments in a way that we haven't before because we've been too busy being reactive. And so today, this use of automation really gets us to be proactive, but the thing I think about is it helps us to tap into the raw talent of the team. It lets people focus in on their expertise and their areas of passion a little more than doing the day-to-day, repeatable functions. Okay. I will now hand it back to Phil for any Q&A.
That's great, Eddie. Thanks very much. And I just want to echo all of the comments from Craig and Eddie around automation. That is the future. That is what we are trying to build at AWS, are the services to enable that automation, and that's what I hope all security teams out there are taking advantage of. We're going to move into the Q&A section now. As a reminder, you can submit your questions in the questions pane, which is located in the control panel. And I really encourage you to do that. You've got myself, you've got Craig, and you've got Eddie for the next about half hour live to answer any questions that you guys have around any of the things that we discussed or around automation, AWS, security in general. So let me start with a question for Craig. Craig, a question that came in: how is the data that Evident.io uses collected from my AWS accounts?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Phil. So the way that we do it, we collect all of the metadata, not the actual customer data. So it's purely just your configuration information, and we do that through the existing AWS provided APIs. So we make API calls every 15 minutes to establish what that configuration looks like. And in order for us to have enough permission to collect the data from your AWS account, we ask you as the customer to create a cross-account read-only IAM role, which is the most secure way for us to provide, for you to provide access to us. And then you give that role the built-in security policy called security audit, and that's enough for us then to collect the data. So we don't require the customer to create a special IAM user for Evident, and neither do we ask you to give us your access key ID or your secret access key. It's purely done on that cross-account read-only role. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, I just want to echo that use of the cross-account role is definitely the best practice for doing that. So thanks for following that, and other people when you're working with your other third parties, that's a great thing to make sure that they're doing. Next question is for Eddie. Eddie, do you think that, and this question came in, do you think that your teams understand the importance of security now, or do they consider it a nuisance?
It's an interesting question. I think we still get a little bit of both. We're trending towards, I think everyone understands the importance of security. I think we're trending away from people feeling like it's a nuisance and trending towards something that people feel like it's an opportunity for them to do it, to learn more about it, to, they see it in the news every day, they read about it. We've done a good job at helping folks understand how what they do can potentially impact the company. And so it's just really working on changing the culture to tie people's hearts to the work, for lack of a better term. So I think some still feel like it's a nuisance, but all feel it's important.
Okay, thanks for that. More questions are coming in, which is great. Just want to encourage everybody again to send the question in via the questions tab. This next one is for Craig. First, just a comment actually. So the questioner, the person who asked the question, mentioned that Gartner recommended that organizations embed a security person in the development teams, which is something that we referenced. I just want to let that person that asked the question know that we'll send you that reference back via email after this, just to follow up, and we'll see if we can embed that in the deck as well before we share it to everybody. The question for Craig is, ESP, is it only offered as a SaaS service, or are there other options?
Yes, pretty much it's a SaaS platform, and that's the way that we prefer to deliver it. However, in saying that, in government accounts in the US, we have deployed it as a private SaaS instance, which is effectively installing the whole platform within a customer's VPC. But certainly the preferred and the easiest way to consume the service is via the SaaS offering.
All right, let's just stay on Craig for a little while here, because the questions are definitely rolling in for Evident.io. How would you compare Evident.io with tools like, for example, Nessus Pro?
Okay, so Nessus Pro would be more of a vulnerability scanner, whereas our product is purely around looking at your configuration state and looking at where vulnerabilities exist. So it's a ongoing, every 15-minute scan of your environment rather than a one-off vulnerability scan. And that sort of leads into another question around why don't traditional security approaches work in the cloud. And we find that the traditional security solutions are still relying on being in the path of the traffic. So deployed inside the application or the operating system, or using those network scanning techniques. But the problem with that is that in the cloud, the applications are often running on abstracted services like PaaS layers, which often render those conventional scanning solutions ineffective. The other thing is that the APIs drive everything in the cloud, so a lot of the legacy security tools that weren't designed to support that API-centric infrastructure don't work. So we have to really look at purpose-built tools that can monitor and manage security and compliance through the API control plane. The other point I wanted to make was that the old security model is fairly unsustainable. So coupled with the flexibility of the cloud, the agile development and the DevOps movement, this has accelerated the speed of development cycles, and things change a lot more frequently. So security teams can't rely on pre-deployment scanning and penetrations tests or presence-based discovery methods like they used to. Instead, again, they have to rely on these automated API-centric tools. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, and here's a related question that came in, so let me ask it now. Does Evident.io scan only at the AWS API level that you were just describing, or can it also scan at the OS level as well?
No, it's all predicated on what information can be delivered through the AWS API. Now, in saying that, we have this capability called user attribution, and what that does is it allows us to take advantage of AWS CloudTrail, which is the AWS audit service, and that then gives us an extra layer of granularity to the alert. So what we've done is we've done the heavy lifting by ingesting and correlating the alert with the CloudTrail event that caused it, and what that does is it helps you identify who might have introduced the risk and when it first occurred. And this helps with another issue. Imagine that if the risk wasn't introduced manually, but it was rather done programmatically, so perhaps through a CloudFormation template. So instead of the ARN being the user, it might be the CloudFormation template ID. And so what this does is it gives you greater information that you might have a faulty CloudFormation template, and that template is introducing security problems into your environment. Thanks, Phil.
All right, that's great. Let me take a question that came in, and then I'll go back to Eddie in a second. The first question that I'll address is Evident.io an AWS partner? So the answer is yes, absolutely. They are what we call a global competency technology partner. We have a series of global security technology partners around the world. If you just search for AWS Security Technology Partner, you'll see a list of them, and very happy to have Evident.io on that list. And they're what we call a competency partner, which actually means they're have gone through a whole series of stages with us to make sure that they're able to work across our environment and that the partnership status is very good. So they're actually quite a good partner of ours. Here's a question for Eddie. Eddie, how do you enlist the developers and operations folks in your team into, or in your organization, into building security by design?
Actually, we have a formal program that we're actually kicking off. We piloted it a little bit, but the idea is that we're incentivizing folks with free training in security and establishing particular goals for them to enhance how their teams actually build security into their solutions by design. And if they meet those goals, then we reward them with recognition and a spot bonus. And so what that's doing is starting to build a little bit of excitement in the development world in such a way that people are becoming advocates for our team in their groups. Now, additionally, I believe in transparency, so we have a dashboard that we review on a regular basis with our leadership, so people do not want to be read on that dashboard because it's a bit of an embarrassment. So we have two incentives, right? Public kind of shaming, for lack of a better term, and incentivizing the involvement of our developers in the, the approach or the goal of designing solutions securely by design.
Eddie, that's great. The classic carrot and the stick. I really like that approach. Here's a couple more questions for Craig. Craig, we're going to keep you busy. This first one I think is a great one and very relevant. Is Evident.io looking at supporting other clouds apart from AWS? And they mention Azure, SoftLayer, etc.
Yeah, that's actually a very timely question because we are about to announce support for Azure at the Ignite conference in the US this week. So we will have full support for Microsoft Azure. We don't have SoftLayer on the roadmap at this stage, but we are considering Google Cloud Platform as another one. So they're giving you that single pane of glass monitoring across all of the cloud providers.
Okay, great. And then Craig, can you talk some more, and this is one that comes up a lot in my customer conversations about Evident.io. Can you talk some more about how you can customize Evident to add your own controls? For example, can these control applications that, and can these control the applications themselves and not the AWS specific controls?
So we have the ability, well, we call them signatures, which are the security checks that are built in. When you first sign up to Evident, there's about 130 odd signatures that are turned on by default, and they look for typical problems such as I mentioned earlier, security group ports being left open or S3 bucket policies not existing, so the S3 bucket is not protected, or encryption not enabled on a EBS volume, etc., etc. List goes on. We find that some customers either want to take an existing signature and perhaps tweak it and modify it and then run the customized version of the signature. We support that. We also support the ability to write your own from scratch. So you can, using Ruby or JavaScript, create your own signatures. And often you do that based upon an existing signature that's a starting point template. And you can write your own to check for things that are relevant to you and as part of your best practices. We also have a whole bunch of signatures in a GitHub repository that are more specific and not as generic, and we make that available to customers as well. So they can go to the GitHub repository, browse through the existing set of signatures, and if they find something that's relevant, they can install it into their own platform. It's still all, again, predicated on the ability to, the information that we're getting back from the cloud provider as to what we can check for.
Okay, great. So we've got about 15 minutes left, so please keep those questions coming in. We've actually got quite a lot to go through, so I will keep going. Let's ask Eddie a question now. Eddie, this question came in. How do you feel that Evident.io works with or replaces traditional GRC? I'll just say, for example, like an Archer. So how does it either complement or replace a GRC solution?
Yeah, I don't think it replaces a GRC solution. So let's just put that out there. I think it complements it because you now have an ability to look at all the technical controls of an environment systematically and plug that into our GRC tools as evidence that we are compliant. And so the GRC tool can then build some workflow behind that. There may be some opportunities to replace reporting of the GRC tool, but we find when we're doing our audits and when we're, attesting to compliance, we're using reports both from our GRC and complementing that pretty heavily with what we can get out of Evident. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, good. That definitely helps. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. A question that I'll take here real quick. What does Evident.io provide that AWS Inspector does not? So AWS Inspector is really focused on scanning for vulnerabilities that exist within the operating systems that customers choose to install, for example, in EC2. So it's very much a vulnerability scanner, let's say, similar to the Nessus that was brought up in a previous question. Evident.io is looking at a much broader set of cloud security configuration issues, primarily through the APIs, through kind of the language of the cloud platform itself. So it's looking at an end-to-end view of many of the different security configurations that exist in all of the cloud, whereas Inspector is really just looking at vulnerabilities within individual operating systems. Here's another good question that comes up in some of our conversations. This one is for Craig. Craig, how does Evident.io prevent customers from seeing other Evident.io customers' data?
Yeah, thanks. So we are a true multi-tenant environment. We isolate individual customers' information from each other based upon the inbuilt security practices that AWS provides. So we have complete isolation between the metadata and the alerts that we're presenting between customers. We do that through, things like authentication techniques. We also support multi-factor authentication as well, so that you can have that extra layer of protection for your users that are using Evident. And we can also separate within an organization. We have a role-based access controls that allow you to segregate individual users within your customer. So when you enroll an AWS account that you want to monitor, you can do that at a team or a sub-organization level, and depending on where you add your users determines at what level they can see information that we're monitoring.
Okay, Craig, more for yourself, specifically around the types of things that Evident.io can support. The first one is, do you support and can you review VPC flow logs?
At the moment, no. We can view information on how VPCs are configured. We have that on as a roadmap item to be able to correlate VPC state against with VPC flow logs in a similar way to how we do user attribution for the CloudTrail logs. So that is coming, but at the moment we're just looking purely at the configuration of the VPCs and whether there's vulnerabilities and misconfigurations within those.
And then another around what you support, can you detect SQL injection attempts? Or do you only look at, or can you look at actual web server configurations?
No, again, that would be something that you'd use a WAF product for, Web Application Firewall, to detect SQL injections. So we're complementary to other tools that AWS provide. So we're not looking at traffic flowing through your environment. We're more looking at how you've configured your environment and alerting you to issues there.
Okay, Eddie, I liked the carrot and the stick, as I'm paraphrasing an answer from before, so let me ask you another one that's come in, and I think it's a good one for somebody in your role. What does success look like for your team? How do you actually measure that?
So that's a really good question. So we have a particular dashboard with particular controls that we want to see in place, especially for our cloud-built applications. So I'll describe a couple of them. One is all around insight. So ensuring that your systems have an agent that allows us to do vulnerability scanning and management of any net new environment or any net new service that gets spun up within AWS. So you must use our AMIs that we build, our gold images, and we enforce that. Another is we have some patching rules, like there's actually, let's call them vulnerability rules. You're not allowed to have, certain criteria of vulnerabilities in your environment at all. And so when you do, you get the stick, for lack of a better term. Then we look at configuration items. If you have anything that's over a medium risk level, then we're talking quite a bit. So we're managing that, and anything below that is a success. And then we have some of those types of KPIs around monitoring. So if you're not in compliance with our monitoring, then you're not successful. So if we're running at a state that we're meeting all of those KPIs, then that's successful for us.
Okay, thanks. Let's go from a policy and team question to more of a technical question. I'll take part of this one, and Craig, I think Evident also has a role to play in this, and it's really topical, which is why I want to ask it. So the question was, please explain what the day-to-day security best practices are when using S3, for example, when using it with an on-prem dev environment, in transit. So first of all, I think we'll all know S3 configuration issues are certainly quite topical. S3 is AWS's global object store, and it's a very, very popular service, very well used all around the world. And when customers make good decisions about it, it's a great way to store sensitive data of all types through our use of really fine-grained access controls, available tight integration with encryption platforms like key management service, etc. However, it is a above-the-line configuration, so sometimes customers choose to make objects globally accessible, and it might be a really fine idea to make an object globally accessible. For example, a lot of websites and static image files are hosted on S3, and if it's an image as part of your public website, you definitely want the world to be able to read it, maybe not write to it or change its policy, but definitely to read it. So the two inherent best practices for S3 are first to look at the bucket policies themselves, and these are S3 specific, and have a really good sense of, how much exposure do you want that object to have? Is it, like I said, an image on your public website and therefore should be globally readable? Or is this something that you want to keep more private? It acts like a traditional server does with gets and puts, etc. So think about it in that regard. The second is how it interacts with identity and access management, specifically AWS IAM. And when using it on premises, for example, with developers, make sure that those developers are all in a role with appropriate permissions. For example, to access a specific S3 bucket, maybe a developer would need to write to that bucket or have the automated process they're building write to that bucket. And then have that role federated from your on-premises source of information, we talked about Active Directory before, into AWS IAM. There's a lot more there, and happy to go into more detail in a follow-up email, but in general, look at the bucket policies and look at the IAM roles. Craig, I think Evident has a way to actually help customers with this for checking S3 buckets. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've just, in the last week or so, released this custom compliance module that I mentioned earlier you can use to create checklists against your own best practices. And one of the first modules or views that we've created is called the AWS S3 Bucket Fitness View. And what that does is it's specific to the security of your S3 buckets. So it's a subset of controls that might make up a larger compliance view, and it will check things like the S3 access controls, who can view or list my S3 bucket, who can access the objects in the bucket, who can do puts in, and there's individual checks for each of these, and it'll alert you across all of your accounts and all of your S3 buckets as to how open or secure they are. And importantly, it can look at who can delete stuff out of the bucket as well. And the other thing it will check for is object versioning. So one of the best ways to prevent data loss is to have object versioning, so that if you lose or if something gets corrupted inside the bucket, you can roll back to a previous version. And so we can check whether that versioning has been enabled across each bucket. And then the final thing it can check is, can we audit the activity in my S3 buckets? So if something does happen, do we have the auditing information turned on that allows us to go and find out when that event occurred and who caused it? Thanks, Phil.
So let's do another quick one for Craig, and then I had a good one come in for Eddie, and we've got time for that, so I'll do that next. So Craig, how does Evident.io detect a DDoS attack? Is it possible to detect a DDoS attack, and if so, how do you do that?
We can rather than detecting an active attack, we can give you recommendations on how to prevent an attack. Things like using CloudFront to protect your back end, so that if you were attacked, the attack is limited to the edge point. The other one that we can check for is whether you've got some auto-scaling capability. So if you do get hammered with a denial of service attack, have you got the ability to write it out by adding new instances to kind of protect yourself and make sure that you still maintain the service.
And then Craig, just following up on that real quick, because I want to get the last question for Eddie. Can you recognize any other kind of architectural and configuration issues, such as not using a CDN or ELBs or elastic load balancers in front of servers instead of directly exposing them to the internet? Are you looking for other best practices as well related to CDN or ELBs?
Yeah, so we've got checks for both of those. So if you're not using CloudFront, we'll provide an alert for that. Similarly with the elastic load balancing, if you haven't got those in place, then you will see alerts, whether they're high risk or medium risk or low risk. I can't quite remember, but you'll still see them as risks in your environment. And talking about the elastic load balancer, one of the other good things we've got is as new vulnerabilities are discovered, we're very quick to release checks for those. So people may remember the Poodle vulnerability that was specific to elastic load balancers and using SSL version 3. Well, we actually had a check in place before Amazon notified the customer base that this was a problem.
Great answer. Okay, last one for Eddie. And Eddie, feel free to take a couple minutes. We've got at least 2 minutes left, so go ahead and explain it fully. And I promise I did not write this question myself. Do you find that your cloud development environments are in a better security or compliancy state than your legacy environments? And in which environment is it quicker to respond to security issues?
Interesting question. I would say it's like comparing apples and oranges, right? It's very different. I would say we had good security in place in the legacy kind of end-tier architecture environments. But with the cloud, I think we're also good and getting better. And we can respond much quicker in the cloud because we can actually automate the response to things like configuration issues. And in the old world, that would mostly be a physical exercise or activity, meaning you had to swap drives out, you had to build new systems, you had to do something physical, which took time. Today, that's not an issue. And you can even patch in a way that you can actually not patch. You can rebuild an environment with a gold image to ensure you're leveraging the latest, greatest standard of an AMI. So those are just some examples of how you can rapidly affect and introduce better protection into a cloud environment. So I think from my perspective, the cloud is good in multiple ways. So if I think about SaaS services that provide you security capabilities, so Evident can help you audit. If you were building this stuff yourself, you want to be able to put as much money, time, attention, innovation into a product like this. And so when you're leveraging cloud services, especially within a cloud infrastructure, you can get much more rapid response to actually addressing vulnerabilities and security issues. And so I think they're both, in retrospect, the old was good. The new is also good and different, but easier to actually manage security in when you get the right automation and the right partnerships in place.
That's great, Eddie. Thanks very much. So that's the last question that we'll take right now in the Q&A. I want to thank everybody a lot for sending us those great questions over the last half hour. I want to really thank very much everybody that's attended. We had really good attendance and interaction this time, so thanks for that. Thank our speakers, Craig and also Eddie. And then please, if anybody else has questions about anything related to security in the cloud, reach out directly. Thanks all very, very much, and let's all keep working together to keep the cloud secure. Bye.